Okay, Rabotai. Today, I thought it would be most appropriate to speak about the Sukkot, and particularly the Arbata Minim. Particularly about the Arbata Minim. Okay, yeah, we'll focus on Arbata Minim. We'll see if we have time at the end. We'll speak about different minagim on Yom Kippur, but I think mostly Arbata Minim, it's a nice time to speak about. And we'll start with the following. Everybody wants to know first what type of etrog to buy. What type of etrog to buy. And what's the Masoret by Moroccan etrogim. Sorry. So, etrogim is a complicated subject. There are basically, we'll call it, there's dozens of types of etrogim, but let's just break it down to some of the more known ones. There's the Chazonish etrogim. There's the Yanover, which Chabad uses from the Greeks, Italy area. I'm sorry, Calabria. It's called. There's the Teimani etrog. There's etrogim that are different places in Israel. They have all types of names. The number one concern that people look for in an etrog is, before all of its characteristics, is that it should be an etrog. It should actually be not an etrog, and not like when you're buying a car. You don't want to buy a lemon, so you don't want to buy a lemon when you buy an etrog. Maybe they got that from the etrog, I don't know. And the masoret of the etrogim is something that is very hard to know, because now, how are you going to know if it's murkav or not? You could tell if in that generation, that tree's generation, or maybe beforehand it was murkav, but not a little bit beforehand. So you really have to have some type of trust basis. And especially, they have, here we have our guests. Oh, very nice. Come, grab it. Chai mashlomcha. This is our Chazana Bakashot. זה השיעור שלנו בגרייט נק. You remember חי? You know חי?
כן, כן, הוא זוכר אותי. הוא היה מגיע לפייפטאונס. יפה, איזה ש...
אולי תפתח לנו באיזה... לפתוח באיזה...
ידיד נפש כדי להיכנס.
ידיד נפש להיכנס.
ידיד נפש עבר חומה משוך עבדך אל רצונך לה לה לה.
Okay, now we can start. Now we can start.
Carry on.
Now we can start. Okay. So here we are. We're discussing the Masoret of Moroccan etrogim, and what etrogim are the proper etrogim to take. So the number one thing that we determine is you have to take an etrog. Before anything else, it has to be an etrog. So an etrog usually is based upon the tradition. There's a tree type called the choshchush tree, which strengthens the etrog. And it's a big Yetzirah by people who grow etrogim to use that, especially because they base themselves that you're allowed, because it's not really another fruit tree, all types of iterim that they'll justify. And on the market, there are etrogim that are like that, believe it or not. The Chazonish, when he was walking in Tzfat, he identified certain etrogim. He says these are etrogim trees that are 100%. How he knew is a mystery, but he knew. And his Talmidim took and planted. There's Lepkovich, there's all types of Talmidim that took those seeds. And that's called the Chazonish etrog. Now, by the Chazonish etrog, you're going to some of them that have the pitam, some of them that don't have the pitam. And we're going to discuss the pitam in a moment before we get to that. The Yanover Calabria Chabad uses. The Moroccan etrog is in the area of Chevel Sus, which is Tarudant. Where is exactly Tarudant? Next to Marrakesh,
Outside of Agadir.
outside of
Agadir.
next to Agadir, and next to Agadir, it grows wild. It was growing wild, and that was the main chazakah of the Etrogim, because they grew wild. So here you have very based testimonies from the Etrogim, and we'll see what the questions on it are, and what the actual din is. Number one is like this: is that the Sefer Shelot Utshuvot Yishrei Lev from Rav Chaim David Chazan. He was a Rishon Netzion, and this Sefer was printed in Tafshin Lametet in Izmir. He writes from three of the Chachmim Ma'arav that lived in Yerushalayim from the year Tafresh Chavdalid, it's a while ago, who write about this Moroccan Etrog. Not only that, the Aruch Laner, it goes as far back as the Aruch Laner. He has a very famous, important sefer on the Arbat Aminim in the back, and there he brings Heviu li Etrog me Hashana Aruch Laner Tosefet Bichurim Siman Tafresh Memhei B'Shana Zot Kibalti Etrog Morocco Yafe umehudar bechol minei hechsher asher adayin lo ra'iti kamo. It has the look of it, Etrog. It's beautiful, it's healthy. It has the look of Mareha Etrog. And I just saw today something that it's a letter printed. It's not printed in any sefer, but it's a letter printed from the son of Rav Shlomo Kluger, who was asked about different Etrogim, and he said, the Moroccan Etrog, I know from testimony that it's mehudar, and we have been using it. Rabbi Machluf Abu Chatzera, Av Bedin in Marrakesh, he was a grandson of Rabbi Yaakov Abu Chatzera from another son. He was cousins with Baba Sali. So he writes in Shirut Utshuvot Yefei Shas Ibn Mem Daled that this was the minhag avotenu midor dor, and he says this was the absolute minhag. It's known by the Ashkenazi Rabbanim, the Briskerov would get an etrog every year. Actually, Rav Aaron Montenegro used to bring in an etrog, and he would use it. It's not clear if that was the one he made the bracha on. He had a lot of different etrogim, but Rabbi Yashiv, it's known, made a bracha on that etrog. Rabbi Yashiv would have made a bracha on the Moroccan etrog. There was as well the
would bring the etrog many years. He told me to Rav Kanievsky.
Rav Kanievsky. The Shelot Utshuvot Shuvot Ve'anagot Chelek Aleph Siman Shin Pei Aleph brings that the brisk Rav was Yotzeh with the Moroccan etrog Hallel with it. That's what he writes. So the question is like this: there was a kuntris that came out a while ago that had questions on the Moroccan etrog, which is like this: if you open up the Moroccan etrog, you can't find seeds. And if you open up the Mishtabura says that there are three simanim to an etrog, right? And he brings from the Tshuvot Maram Mipadva. Number one is that it should have bumps, which they have. Number two is that the oketz and the pitam on the bottom and the top should be shavish, should be more or less aligned. And number three is that the seeds should be horizontal, not vertical. Now, the problem is that the seeds are not found in Moroccan etrogim. That's where people had a question. Now, the question is like this: it's not, these simanim are not written anywhere in Shas. What's written in Shas is in the Gemara Masechet Sukkah that writes that basically Ezeu etrog pri etz hadar hainu daf lamedei hainu etzo piryo shavesh yedar be'ilan mishana leshana. The Maram ben Chabib explains, what does that mean, etzo v'piryo shaveh? That means that an etz, it's its bark, and an etrog, it mostly has rind, so that's its bark. That's etzo v'piryo shaveh, and it's dar be'ilan mishana leshana. And the Ritva writes the following. There's the Ritva, the Meiri, they explain something very important. They say the Gemara is not coming to say that that this is an etrog, something that is etzov v'piryo shaveh. Shezeh yadua lanu mimesoret, says the Ritva. That is known from tradition. That's not a question. Rather, it's coming to tell us a hint from the pasuk Etz Hadar that that's Ainu Etrog. You want to know a smach, and the Birsha Mishnayot of the Rambam says as well. Etrog means is that it's nimsar from generation to generation. It's something that has a masoret. And these etrogim, they have been used for generations upon generations. Up until Rabbi Mazuz from Tunisia, from Jerba, they had etrogim in Tunisia, and his father, it's written, and he himself would not use anything but a Moroccan etrog because they felt that was the etrog that they knew had a long tradition on. Baba Sali was vehemently he was vehement to use only a Moroccan etrog. One year they brought him from Eretz Yisrael, and obviously people say there's an inyan of Eretz Yisrael, but he refused. He says, number one, he has to find a Moroccan etrog because that's the tradition that we have, midore dorot. So to say that a Moroccan has a minhag dafka to have a Moroccan etrog, you can't really say that because they used it because it was there. It's not that they had the Chazanish and then they had the Moroccan. So and there's that's what there was. Now, is there a strong masoret? There's a very strong masoret, but a Moroccan doesn't have I don't think at least doesn't have an obligation to take a Moroccan etrog more than an Ashkenazi, or an Ashkenazi doesn't have an obligation to take a Chazanish more than a Moroccan. You have to take an etrog kasher. You have to take an etrog kasher. Moroccan etrog happens to have a very important yichus. Chazanish also has a strong yichus, and each one you have. Now the Teimani, I have never understood really what the big thing about Teimani. I know Rav Avad Yosef advocates, although Rav Avad Yosef and Chazon Ovadia writes about the great ma'alot you have in the Moroccan etrog.
In the minhagim, when you're doing whatever other minhagis you have, right? It goes as personal authority that we're going by. Right? What's the difference between the Temani etrog and the Moroccan etrog? Maybe different shapes?
Oh, so I want to say one thing that's different between the Moroccan and the Temani etrog. The Rosh writes, etrog she'en alaf pitam is pasul. An etrog that doesn't have a pitam is pasul. So this is going to be something that flies in the face of many etrogim, that people have etrogim that don't have a pitam, correct? So there's different ways how to explain the Rosh. The way the Rabbi Yashiv explains it is that if a pitam falls on the tree, right, the pitam starts growing, it's the first thing that grows out of the tree, right? That little bud that comes out, that's the pitam. If the pitam is going to fall within the time period before the pri is called chayav v'ma'aser, which is shlish gidulo, which is a third of its growth, then it's considered that the etrog is fine because that's derech gidulo. Doesn't have to have a pitam. And that's why an etrog that you see on the market that doesn't have a pitam, usually it fell off before shlish gidulo. However, it's not always sure. Many other poskim say as long as it fell off while it was on the tree, is fine. And when I was learning by the Gedolei Yerushalayim how to tell what type of pitam, what type of etrog that doesn't have a pitam when it fell, so they had from one of the great Bekiyim, Rav Moshe Elder Zichron Livracha, he would always say that you have to have like a little ring that's indented to know that it's an etrog that doesn't have a pitam from the beginning. But Rav Chaim Pinchas Scheinberg, and if I'm not mistaken, Rav Bronsdorfer, but I have to double check, they learned the Rosh Kepshuto. An etrog that doesn't have a pitam is not called an etrog. And there's definitely a hidur of taking an etrog with a pitam. No question about it. So if I have two etrogim with a masoret, one of them has a pitam, one doesn't have a pitam, of course I'm going to take one with a pitam. No question about it. Okay, so I don't know how much more, I can tell you about different names, about peoples and stories who took a Moroccan etrog, but I just wanted to give you the yesod and the that Rav David Ovadia, Zichrono Livracha, from Sofro, I used to be quite close to him. He has a long letter, and he writes that the little dots that are in the Etrog, if you open up, there's these brown dots that are, if you slice it open, says those are the beginning of Garinim, and that's enough. And he said on top of that, there's sometimes fruits that some of them have Garinim and have them don't. Like let's say you have grapes. Some grapes have seeds, some grapes are seedless. So some etrogim are seedless, some etrogim are not seedless, but it's called tamid yesh, right? That's the you're never gonna be able to be machriya that's considered a deciding factor. The main thing is that you come down to the Gemara and the way the Pirish Mishnah Rambam says, the way the Ritva says, it's totally if it has a Masoret or not. Okay. Next. There's a. Okay, so we did Etrogim. Regarding the Lulav. The minhag in Morocco, and here there's a strong minhag, is to take a lulav with a kara. Is to take a lulav that is closed till the top, has the red bark on it. That is the minhag, and this minhag is written in the Sdei Chemed. In Asifa Dinim Marechet Arbat Minim Siman Gimel Ot Aleph, and the Bet Yosef brings this down. The Bet Yosef says Na'agu lakachat im kara. Now, the what? Can't hear you. What? You know what? The audio is not so good. You're gonna have to type in the questions. Okay, afterwards. So the issue is like this. Let me tell you how it was by me growing up with Arbat Aminim. I was zochet to live in Yerushalayim for a good 10 years, a little less than 10 years. Yeah, 10 years. And I had the zichut of knowing really the big poskim in Yerushalayim, and thanks to my wife, I was able from Tzom Gedalia till Sukkot to sit by these Gedolei Rabbanim, and they would have thousands of people coming to them, asking them about Arbat Aminim. I moved here in LA. I said, you know what? We'll set up shop on Beverly Glen and Santa Monica. I'm gonna sit. Nobody asks any questions. Nobody. I said, okay, no, nobody asks questions, fine. I went to Rabbi Bess. He said, once in a while they came. He's the big posik in LA. Once in a while they come, they ask questions. So nobody really cares over here. They order and they get their etrog and lulav from shul, and that's it. So it was a little bit of a culture shock for me to get used to it. But either way, I was used in Yerushalayim of people spending hours on a lulav. They would take the lulav and they would open it and you look with a glass. Now what are you looking for with the lulav? There are three things that you're looking for, be'ikar. Number one is the tiyomet. There's a machloket Shulchan Aruch and Ramah. If nechlika hatiyomet in the middle is the middle leaf or all the leaves. The Mishnah says nechlika hatiyomet pasul. So the Shulchan Aruch says it's most alim have to be closed, which you'll always have. The Ramah said, unless it's like a really dysfunctional lulav, the middle leaf has to be closed. The Ramah writes, nechlika hatiyomet is the middle leaf from the spine. Sometimes you'll have two. Most of the time you have one. You look at it, it has to be closed on top. That's a mehudar lulav. And there's a whole chachma to know what's called closed and what's called a little bit open, and if it's too open, you can sometimes glue it together according to some poskim. That's the Ramah's opinion. Now, one way to be miyashiv, why we took the kara, is because even though nechlakat yomet could be found, but we're not choshesh because even if it is found, it's the middle leaf, but most leaves are closed. That is the what you would think why Sfaradim and especially Moroccans have a minhag to take something that is closed with the kara. Nevertheless, I found once in a sefer Hazikaron brought in the name of Rabbi Tzion Abba Shaul that if the tiyomet in the middle is split and it's open, even though the rest of the leaves are closed, safek brachot leakel, you can't make a bracha because the Rama says it's pasul. And you could question this Rabbi Tzion Abba Shaul because you don't say a safek brachot leakel on a mitzvah, you only say it on a bracha. But let's say the mitzvah has a safek, so then you say safek. So who says that just because that is safek brachot leakel, safek mitzvah leakel? We don't say that. Either way, that's what Rabbi Tzion Abba Shaul says. And based on this, if you're going to go to Rabbi Tzion Abba Shaul, you have to be worried. And why should you take something with the kara? Number two, the second thing that you should be concerned with is nitla. In other words, if it was chopped on top. If the niktam rosho on top, thank you, niktam rosho. Now niktam rosho could be a big problem. A lot of times you have lulavim, especially the Egyptian non-dairy ones, that they come out, and or even the California and Arizona ones, they come out very, very, very thin, and the California ones, and it's like almost like a brown spike, and any klap that you're gonna have on it is already gonna be a niktam rosho, and not even according to Shulchan Aruch is a problem. So that kara solves, because if you have a kara on top, you know it's not niktam rosho. That's a ma'ala. But then you have a third thing called a himnik. If it was opened, kehimnik. What does kehimnik mean? Here you have two explanations. Some Rishonim say himnik is mamish like a V, like a pitchfork. That means the middle leaf, if it's opened kehimnik, it's pasul. There's a levushe srad that Rabbi Yashiv was concerned for the levushe srad, that himnik means that if it's open just a little bit, like this, not nechleka, which is just split, but it's just a little bit more open, that's called kehimnik, and that's pasul. And then even the Shulchan Aruch is going to say that middle leaf is pasul. And that could be matsui, even according to the Shulchan Aruch. So that might be a reason to take something that's not a kara. Number one, Rabbi Tzion Abba Shaul is choshesh for the Ramah, that if it's nechleka kiyomet, it's pasul. And number two, it might be a himnik and it's pasul. I was actually discussing this week with the Rosh Kol in Montreal, Rav Yehuda Badush, who's actually a nephew of the speaker that we're going to have in around 15 minutes. His name is Rabbi Burstein from Los Angeles, from Beis Yaakov, Los Angeles. She's married to the niece of Rabbi Burstein, actually. And he was telling me, he learned in Brisk, and he's very, very machbir on all of the different chumrot that you have in Arba Binim. And he said that his father, Rav Avram Badush, Zichron Livracha, was really the pioneer builder in Mexico. If you have all the kolalim in Mexico, really started from him, Rav Avram Badush. Rav Avram Badush, just to tell you, was a bacher in Morocco, and Rav Zedel Semetsky, who was the chavruta of Rav Chaim Shmulevitz, was mechalel Shabbat to save him because he knew that the secular Zionists were going to take him and ship him to some kibbutz. So on Shabbat, he was mechalel Shabbat, and he saved Rav Avram Badush, and he sent him to England to learn, and because of that we have Mexico. It's just to give you a perspective. So Rav Avram, he said that his father would always insist that they had a kara, and he never really listened. He said, what, kara, why, everybody opens. But he said, you see the Bet Yosef says kara. You see that was our minhag. Obviously, we take upon when the kara is closed, there's a chazaka. And he was telling me it's even more than a chazaka. It's mamash miuch she'enu matsui. First of all, it must be that in Morocco we weren't choshesh for the luvush shrad, that the himnik is a little bit. It has to be a much wider something to be called a himnik. And number two, Nechlekat Yomid. Maran says it's not the middle leaf. To be choshesh for the Ramah that it's Nechlekat Yomid till the middle, it has to be roasted the Yomid to be pasul. Otherwise, it's just a chashash. It might open. We weren't choshesh for that when it's a kara. So the minhag is to take a kara. Number two is that there's a very famous minhag in Morocco, in any Moroccan synagogue you go to, is that the way that they tied the lulav was with beautiful strings made out of gold, made out of red. And this, it takes a little bit of courage, if you're going in a mainstream Ashkenazi minyan to walk with a pom-pom on your lulav, you gotta have guts. So I remember I was very close in Eretz Yisrael. One of my rebbeim in Halacha, his name is Rav Yitzchak Mordechai Cohen Rubin. He wrote, maybe related to your Rosh Yeshiva. He wrote the Sefer Orchot Shabbat. Mari Cohen, very popular Sfarim. He grew up in, I think it's called Kiryat Gat. It's a place that his father had the company Menorah that makes all of those Yortzeit candles. That's his father. And he grew up like that, and he used to always talk about how the Moroccan Jews, where he came from, had all these beautiful Etrogim. Somebody told me recently they came up to someone and they commented, how is it that you have such lulavim? So it's kind of embarrassing for somebody to ask such a question because it's the Gemara says it, right? The Gemara says that people would go out with lulavim that were lulavim that were all decorated, and that's how they would go out. In other words, it was a minhag from the time of the Gemara already. And it's a beautiful hidur mitzvah. Now you're going to ask me, it's a chatzitza. So here, number one is the following. There are some, Rav David Ovadia writes in Nagu Ha'am, Od Zayin, that they would only wrap the lulav up to the place of the hadassim. That way there was no chatzitza holding. But even if it was till the end, there's an argument to say that it's for beauty. V'kol na'oto eno chotzetz. But to say that the lulavim are ad kedei kach, in other words, there's no reason really to do till the end. Why get into kol na'oto eno chotzetz? Rav Avram Amar, who was nifter last week, Zichrono Livracha. Rav Avram Amar was the Rosh Yeshiva Or Baruch, and around 18 years ago, I had the zichut of sitting with him and going through the whole Sefer Magen Avot. He wrote a very important kuntras to the Sefer Magen Avot, and he was a very big baki in minagim. He was originally from the city of Meknes. His father was a big posek there. His father used to be the Chavrut of Yitzchak Sabag, who was the Rebbe Rabbi Shalom Mesas. He once asked his father, how many times did him and Rabbi Yitzchak Sabag finish Shas together, Be'iyun? He says, we stopped counting. That was the answer. We stopped counting. Yeah. So he writes in the back of Magen Avot that his father didn't make all these fancy strings. Rather, he would make the regular rings that are made from the lulav itself, and he was choshesh that wherever the hadassim and aravot are, there could be a chatzitza. So he was concerned for chatzitza. And therefore he says that it's written in the book that I wrote that some did till the end and kol na'ot and chotzetz leda'ati lo tov hem osim. That's not good. It has to stop earlier. That's what his ha'ara was. Okay, what else? We went through etrog, lulav, aravot. There's nothing really to speak about. Hadassim also. No particular minhag in hadassim. Just one thing to mention is that הרבה hadassim. The Rambam says there's no baltosif with hadassim, and therefore Chabad also they take a lot of hadassim. מצאת הרבה התימנים עושים את זה.
ממש שיח עם זה.
Yeah, there's no Bal Tosif, so they feel like it's a Hidur mitzvah. Rabbi Machluf Abu Chatzera and Siman Mem Gibel brings from his uncle, Rabbi Yitzchak Abu Chatzera, who was niftar in Tulal.
Oh, that's from Rabbi Yitzchak?
Yeah.
The book that we have here?
Rabbi Yitzchak, no, he says they had that tradition that when he couldn't find Hadassim Kshirim, he used to take one bad and he would take one bad of that had a branch that each one had 3 coming out of it, and if he had no choice, that's what he took. Because there were some that came out that way. And there's a Rashi and Daf Lamed Bet Amud Bet that's how he found it as well. But obviously, I don't think he made a brach on it. It's just sometimes people were stuck with hadassim. The Rama writes about when if you don't have a choice to take hadas shoteh, whether it will be allowed or not. But I think most places they did have proper hadassim. So that's more or less the questions. I'll leave you off with a few minutes remaining regarding the kriyot v'ishtachavayot, which is actually a tshuva that I wrote to Avi Azarwal last year. I don't remember what I was asked by somebody this year. I was asked by a very chashuv Jew in our community. His name is Tzvika Reisman. He writes a lot of svarim, and he asked. He said he gave a shiur whether women bow down during the Seder Avodah of Yom Kippur. Yeah, whenever they say שומעים שם המפורש שיהיו קוראים ומשתחווים ונופלים ואומרים ברוך שם כבוד מלכותו לעולם ועד.
The answer is that even the men don't bow down.
You
didn't expect that one.
Wait, I gotta see. So I'll tell you the story. So he asked me whether women are obligated women should bow down also. So I told them not only that, in Morocco even the men didn't bow down. Now, where do you get this from? There's a Ramah that talks about. I gave a shiur on this. You could find it in Torah Anytime. I think they posted it already. That the Ramah writes, based on the Ravya, that when the Shem HaMefurash, when Chunya ben Akaneh said over the Shem HaMefurash, everyone got bowed down on the floor and they prostrated themselves. He says, this is the Makor Zecher Lazeh. When we hear from the Shaliach Tzibur V'chol Ha'am Korim, they all bow down. So the Rama brings this down, and it seems to be there's no cholek that you should bow down. There's a Sefer Kaf Naki from Rav Khalifa ben Malka, lived next to the city of Agadir. He's buried in Agadir actually.
Same region as the Etrogim.
Yeah, same region as the Etrogim. And the Chida writes on him great things. Sefer Kaf Naki. He writes that since the Bet Yosef wasn't like fully into these ishtachavayot and he didn't bring in a Shulchan Aruch, you don't really have to do ishtachavaya. You could just go till the floor as much as possible. It says, and this is the Minhag Yisrael Torah. It says, this is the Minhag. Very surprising. But this is what he writes. Now the Rivash, he quotes the Rivash. The Rivash is talking about whether the Shaliach Tzibur does it or not because he's going to have to move. So the Rivash says, who says that you're allowed to move in the middle of Shemona Esrei just because of these kriyot? And he says, plus, the kriyot, this Rabbi Avram Ankawa brings in Chelek Bet of Kerem Chemer, Siman Yud Aleph, plus the kriyot that the Shaliach Tzibur does, he's the Dugma Kohen Gadol. The Kohen Gadol, when he said Shema Meforash, he didn't bow down. The Am bowed down. He didn't bow down. So Shaliach Tzibur is Dugmato. So the Kerem Chemer says the Shaliach Tzibur doesn't bow, but everybody else bows. But the Kaf Naki understood that nobody bows. The Kerem Chemer says, I don't know where he got that from. The Rivash is only talking about the Shliach Tzibur. Either way, Rav Avram Amar writes in Magen Avot that he remembers in Meknes they didn't bow. And Rav Meir Atiyah writes in Zichron Livracha, writes in Mishluchan Avotenu, that he says 1 or 2 Chachamim would bow. Personally, I grew up in Montreal. Everyone bowed. Everyone bowed. Everyone went on the floor. We have a few people in our synagogue that they said that they remember in Tangier, they didn't bow. Rav Chai Korkos tells me that. He says that they did bow, but not the Shaliach Tzibur. That they did bow, not the Shaliach Tzibur. So you have different minhagim, but there's definitely a minhag that people didn't bow. brought all from the Kaf Naki. So I said for ladies, there's a Shilot Uchuvot Bet Avi says it's not sniut for ladies to bow, to be mishtachaveh. It's the love urachar. It's not sniut. And Zvika brought from Rav Soloveitchik that he said another pshat why women shouldn't bow. He says because the bowing is dugmat to the Bet HaMikdash, and in the Bet HaMikdash, they was only bowing in the Bet HaKnesset. In the Azara. So the Bet Knesset is like the Azara, but the Ezrat Nashim is not part of the Bet HaMikdash, not part of the Azara. So the Ezrat Nashim, where ladies are, they shouldn't bow. Based on this, Rav Hershel Schechter from Yeshiva University says that last year on the Corona Minyanim, where everybody was praying in the parking lots, it's not a shul, people don't have to bow either. So either way, this is what some say regarding ladies bowing, but like by the Moroccan Minhagim, I think it's pashut that ladies shouldn't bow because it's not sniut. I don't think we've ever seen it. They could be mishtachavit just like in Shmona Yisrei, but till the floor mapitom. Now regarding somebody who doesn't know his minhag, I think I mentioned this call from Rabbi Yashiv a few times that when you don't know your minhag, you're somech on ikar adin. When you don't know your minhag, you're somech on ikar adin, and ikar adin is to bow. That's what the Rama says. I mean, its status quo is that to bow. Rakaf Daki, notwithstanding, says the minhag is not to bow, but Kerem Chemer says not that way. And there was those who did, and there was those who didn't, so it wasn't clear. So regarding bowing, there's definitely minhag. So I was about to write this up this year, and I said, wait, I remember vaguely about this, and I looked at my writings, and last year I wrote you a tshuva on this. Last year I wrote this all up, and I picked you as the korban that I should write it to. So that is more or less the one he'ara on Yom Kippurim. Good? Any questions? Okay.